This week on Quality Digest Live, we found out what happens at the Gemba when the clock strikes midnight.
That's right. Plus, we speak with Alfredo Grandara of ATT Metrology for this month's CMS Corner. That and more when we come back.
Today's episode of Quality Digest Live is sponsored by Olympus Vanta XRF Analyzers. Fast material identification for safer products.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for November 2nd, 2018. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Publisher Mike Richmond. Well, you know, we've been doing this little segment at the top of the show for the last couple of weeks called Rip from the Headlines.
Rip from the Headlines.
Okay. Very dramatic. And you know, there's always a lot of interesting news that comes up, that kind of comes up on the spot of the day. And this one actually came up earlier in the week, but it's really kind of been in the public consciousness for a while. And I wanted to kind of talk to you about it kind of off the cuff a little bit, Dirk, because there was a piece from NPR this week on, I think it was on the 30th, and it was about a company called Mid-Continental Nail. Nail.
Yep.
And they're an Indiana-based, I think, company.
Okay.
And they're a nail manufacturer. They're, I think, the biggest nail manufacturer in the country, one of the biggest in the world. And they rely on Mexican steel as their raw material for their product.
Yep.
Well, many of the people in Mid-Continental voted for Trump, were big Trump supporters, as many people were in the middle of the country, especially those in manufacturing. The promises were that, you know, this was going to improve the lot of a lot of these workers, these companies. Well, in the spirit of unintended consequences, what happened? These tariffs went through now, and now the price of their raw materials has gone up considerably. And they, you know, like many companies, have a choice when that happens. When your raw materials go up for whatever reason, and tariffs are one reason, there are many reasons why raw materials can go up. What choice do you have? You can either suck it up, just live with it, or what most companies do is you pass that along to your customers. Now, if you pass it along to your customers, you're going to risk losing business, because others may not have to. And then you're going to risk what happened in Mid-Con, a lot of layoffs, people not having as much work as they want, shifts being kind of shuttered. The company itself may not make it. And they interviewed in the NPR piece, really interesting, they interviewed a lot of these people who had voted for Trump in 2016. And several of them said, yeah, I'm still with him. I understand what he's trying to do, and I'm still a supporter.
Don't like what's happening, but I'm still going to support him.
But I get it. He's a bigger picture at play here. But others were like, you know, no, this isn't cool. We're not happy with this. We're not going to support Trump probably in 2020 unless things change or their minds are still open. But it really kind of struck me that this idea that what do? You know, there's these unintended consequences, these political winds that blow, and things happen like tariffs that affect companies. And you know, we've seen it actually in our business too. There's a company
just recently.
I don't want to name the company, but there's a company that we got an email from. I'm sure many of their customers and people that they work with got this email too.
In the metrology
space, they are also seeing their raw materials for the products that they make go up considerably.
Some of their products, a certain line of products, They're
going to pass that along to their customers.
So
I guess the bigger question is in this newsy item, this piece about tariffs is, you know, what is the proper course of action for a company that's in this circumstance? How do you survive, have your company be intact if your cost of your raw materials go up to that extent?
Well, and what we're seeing is both. Now, obviously, in the company you were talking about, the metrology company. So it's interesting that we're seeing actually these tariffs have an effect within our space. What this company's doing is kind of a mix and match. They're absorbing, according to their press release that they sent out, they're absorbing some of the cost themselves, and they're passing along some of the cost. So they're kind of splitting the difference more or less. It doesn't work out quite that way, but the idea is they're trying to split the difference. They'll suck up some of it, and they'll pass some of it along. Others not so much. Home Depot, for instance, from what I understand, washing machines, there's a 20% tariff on washing machines. Home Depot, last I read, is passing that full 20% onto the customer. Now, if you think, it depends on the cost of a washing machine, but figure if it's a $500 washing machine, that's $100. So now it's a $600 washing machine.
Yeah.
That's, and so obviously Home Depot doesn't want to hit into their margin, so they're keeping their margins the same, and they're just simply passing that cost along. Which, in one sense, kind of makes sense. Yeah. They're saying, okay, we're not going to affect our margins, we're not going to cut them, we're not going to increase them, we're just going to pass along the exact cost of this tariff to the customer and let the customer eat the entire cost. But other than that, for us, it's status quo. I think that's kind of a gutsy move, but
well, and there's bigger picture items that any one company, any one industry, any group of consumers. I mean, because within the framework of that, there's relativity, right? I mean, so in other words, a bigger organization maybe will suffer from the tariffs. In the short term, they'll say, okay, well, our margins are going to get eaten into. Maybe we have to pass those costs along. Maybe we don't. Whatever we're going to do, it's going to cost us in some way. But maybe because we're large and we're going to struggle with this, but maybe some smaller competitors of ours are going to go out of business because of this. Right. And maybe they're saying, well, strategically, maybe this benefits us in the long term, having these tariffs in place. It's kind of not that different from the political ecosystem that what the federal government is trying to do now in terms of China, saying, listen, we can outlast you. Our economy's bigger. You're going to suffer more than we will. Relatively, we're going to be in better shape, even though maybe everybody's going to suffer in the short term, economically, for this. It's complicated. I mean, these are not easy things to figure out how these things play out in the framework of macroeconomics. So that's really what we're talking about here is macroeconomics within nations. But it was interesting that we saw this with the story at NPR, and then we saw this thing in our own industry.
Well, and actually, we'd be interested in what's happening with you guys out there. Yeah. If you feel that your company is being impacted by tariffs, either through cost of materials, buying materials, or in direct sales of your own products, let us know. I mean, we'd be curious what's actually going on within our industry with you guys out there. So send us an email to qdl@qualitydigest.com.
That's right. And before we move on, because we are talking about politics before we get on the rest of the show.
Okay.
Vote. Please vote on Tuesday.
Right. Tuesday.
Very important. Tuesday is election day, of course. So please vote. I don't even care who you vote for. Really, I don't care what you vote for, who you vote for. To me, voting, the act of voting itself, is really critically important. So please vote.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. If I was to visit your manufacturing facility, I am pretty certain I would find a lot of measurement devices.
Sure.
Depends what you make, but I might find micrometers, calipers, torque wrenches maybe, pressure gauges for sure, height gauges, precision scales. A lot of people have scales. Counting scales. Almost everybody's got a counting scale, and so forth. And all of these devices have to be calibrated from time to time. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the variation inherent in our entire gauge calibration / control system, our measurement system, is an often overlooked part of the journey to reducing variation in our manufacturing process. We go to great lengths to understand variation in our processes and often ignore the variation in the tools that we use to measure that process. So if you think about it, if the tools are off, your measurement's off, and you don't actually know what your process is doing, right? So most of the improvement efforts in organizations are spent on reducing variation among products. Little, if any, attention is paid to the variation introduced into the overall picture due to the measurement system. Our next guest is an expert in measurement system variation and how R&R studies can help us understand and reduce measurement system variation. Eric Gasper is the author of Assessing the Health of a Measurement System. R&R studies ensure your measurement system can measure process variation. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hi, Derek. Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for being here. Well, you said something really interesting, and that was really true in your article. You wrote, I'm going to quote here, most of the improvement efforts in organizations are spent on reducing variation among products. Little, if any, attention is paid to the variation introduced into the overall picture due to the measurement system. So can you elaborate on what you meant there?
Sure. So for anybody that's like a quality manager or a quality department, one of their key focuses is going to be trying to reduce any variation that's coming off the production line. The parts that you're making, the products that you're producing, you're going to be spending a lot of your focus, attention, and energy into making sure that the products that are being made are going to, basically hit the specifications, hit the tolerances so that we can sell these, ship these, make our customers happy. So they're inundated with a lot of information. They utilize different tools, SPC tools. We're going to use control charts and histograms to evaluate the stability of our process, the health of our process. But if somebody brings you or brings me a control chart and everything's out of control, everybody's first reaction is, oh, we need to do something. We need to make a change. We need to shut down production. We need to buy a new part, buy a new product. So I guess my point is that very few times do you have to kind of sit and consider, I wonder if these measurements are valid. Have we done a check on the measurement system itself? And are we potentially just getting out of control points because the measurement system has become unhinged? So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And probably the only thing I want to share with the different listeners and users today is that when you do have an issue, you do have a problem on your production line, or a control chart goes out of control, or your capability is not where you want it to be, take a moment, take a breath, and think and say, hey, when was the last time we did an R&R study? Or when was the last time we evaluated the operators? Do they know how to use the measurement device? Because when you do that, all it does is build trust in the fact that when I look at that control chart, I can make good decisions based off that information.
And briefly, I mean, you just mentioned R&R, and that actually is the topic of a webinar that's coming up next week. But what is, just in general terms, what is an R&R study? What do we mean by that when we say that? And I guess there's different types. There's a gauge R&R, but I think in this context, you're talking about an R&R that's even broader than that.
Yeah, so a gauge R&R, or measurement R&R, or really any way you kind of want to slice and dice it, and it's just an experiment. It's a way to try and duplicate the environment where your users are normally using a measurement device, a tool, a gauge, even a CMM. And we're trying to extract details that's going to give us some useful information about the sources of variation that are inherent in that measurement system. So the purpose of it is really just a way to determine if your measurement system is capable of distinguishing among the parts that you're producing. Essentially, is it up to snuff, and is it willing and able to do the job you're asking it to do?
Okay, and I understand this from the perspective of the gauges themselves, right? I mean, so you can study the gauges. You can, how much variation is there in the gauge itself? How accurate is the gauge? Over time or whatever it is you're doing, multiple measurements. How repeatable is the gauge? But I understand the other part of it is the repeatability, so to speak, of the user, the person using the gauge. Now, with a gauge, you can calibrate it. You can document the variation in the gauge itself, so it's a known. How do you deal with a variation in the human who is using the gauge?
So you mentioned the actual piece of equipment, the equipment variation, the repeatability of it. Can we get consistent results? The appraiser variation is going to be very similar, at least it might take as the approach of how to maybe correct or improve. So for a gauge, you can, like you said, maintain it, do regularly scheduled maintenance, do your calibrations, a check for accuracy or trueness. So then you can document those. You can know what this gauge is pretty much capable of. When you give even a great or a perfect gauge to an inexperienced user or a group of inexperienced users, you're going to get some variation. So the approach is, if you've identified, you've done your repeatability and reproducibility study, and you've identified, well, the main source is coming from the operators. The first thing I would probably do is take a look at some of the charts that can go along with one of these studies. You can actually zero in and get different views of some of the data, so you can identify, well, Mary is the person in this case that is an outlier. That doesn't necessarily mean that Mary is wrong. It just means that she is different from the other two appraisers. So just like before, if you have a gauge that might not be working for you, might not be to the accuracy that you need for the measurement system, you'd almost use the same approach with your appraisers. I'm going to do some maintenance on them. We can do training regimens. We can make sure that they are well versed in how to use the gauge. We can review procedures or methods for how they take the measurements. Sometimes organizations overlook that step. So the biggest part is having a conversation with those operators after the study is completed, share the results, talk to them. Sometimes it might even just be a fluke, meaning, well, this operator had to stay an extra shift just to participate in the study. That can explain why some of their measurements were a bit off. So
Right.
All in all, both times, if you have a problem with your gauge, you can improve it, calibrate it, sometimes even replace it. Same thing with your operators. You can train them or retrain them, not necessarily get new ones necessarily, hopefully, you can keep them around, but you might actually shift them to a different role, a job that they might actually be more skilled for. So it's interesting. You get to learn a lot from these R&R studies, and all of it goes towards making more confident measurements so that when you do have a problem, you can trust them on that control chart and on that histogram.
Oh, perfect. And if our viewers are interested in this topic and want to know more about R&R and how to do an R&R, some of the tools that are available for you, what the process might look like, you might like to know that we're bringing you a webinar next week titled The Importance of R&R Studies. Eric Gasper here, who we just spoke with, is your presenter, and I'll be your host. So check it out. The event is coming this coming Tuesday, next Tuesday, November 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. There is a link to register in Eric's article. It's also, there's a link to the webinar also in the player page down underneath there. You can click on that and go out and sign up for what will be an informative webinar. My feeling is anybody who works in manufacturing, anybody who works in who uses gauges really needs to know how to do an R&R, because as Eric explained there, if you don't know what your measurement, the accuracy and repeatability of your measurement system is, you don't really know what you're doing when you're measuring your process. So be sure to sign up for that. And Eric, thanks for being with us this morning.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Eric. See ya.
All right.
Good stuff there. Yeah, it should be a good webinar.
Yep.
Looking forward to that one.
Got a question for you.
Okay.
Did you read Kevin Meyer's Midnight at the Gemba story?
Yes, I did.
I thought that was pretty interesting. Eric Meyer's one of our frequent contributors. He had a story called Midnight at the Gemba. Early in his career, Myers was working at a large molding facility. It was a large operation with, I think he said, 60 heavy presses in a huge clean room, because this was a medical device that they were making. It was running at full capacity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, all to make medical device components. And it was, when he came on, it was several months behind schedule, and was part of his job to get it running at capacity again. And part of the issue, as he looked into it, and this was part of his job, part of the issue was the quality and productivity of the graveyard shift.
Right.
I never thought about this. Now, his whole article was about going out to the Gemba, and this time it was a Gemba that's largely ignored. I mean, everybody understood how the day shift worked.
Right.
They probably even had a fairly good idea of how the swing shift worked, because a lot of times there's overlap between day and swing. So some of the supervisors may stay a little bit longer just to get up to speed on what swing is doing. But by graveyard shift, by midnight, 1 o'clock, there's nobody there but the guys who are doing the work, right? A completely unknown Gemba. And so they knew there were problems going on here. Well, what's the problems? Well, they didn't realize what the issues were until Kevin called a meeting. He said, okay, I want the management team, supervisors, managers, and so forth to meet here at midnight. They weren't super excited about that exactly. You want me to do what? But they did show up. And he says it was interesting. The initial thought was that there was just a lack of awareness by the managers of what people on the graveyard shift were doing. But as they went out to the Gemba and started talking to people, seeing what was going on, they discovered quite a few other issues that you just don't think about unless you work in it.
You're there.
It was fascinating. I'll just run through a couple of them. One was the inability to quickly change to a new job, a new task, due to lack of materials control and QA support. In other words, there's no front office people and no day shift managers that would normally help you with this changeover. It's like, I got to change tasks. I don't have the materials, and there's no materials people around. What do I do, right? Bad lunch experience. We don't think about this. We get hungry at lunch, we go outside, it's nice and sunny, we may run down to McDonald's or to the local Subway shop or whatever. I'm not going to do that at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? You may not even go outside at 3 o'clock in the morning, because another issue is it's dark. And the darkness is another issue. Even getting to and from your job. You park out in a big dark parking lot, little scary. So women might want to need escorts, back and forth. Some companies supply that for their graveyard workers. Poor lighting, snowy parking lots. middle of winter,
this was the Midwest.
This was the Midwest.
Yeah.
It's like normally, during the day, these might be plowed, or the roads might be plowed. Graveyard shift, maybe not. So the perception was that these employees kind of felt like outcasts and loners, and that nobody really knew what they were doing. And a lot of these people have to work graveyard, and because that's the only shift that's available for them, maybe daycare reasons or whatnot.
Yeah.
They got to work graveyard. So they set about to remedy these things. And so, so they became more familiar with the Gemba and what was going on. And one of the things that they discovered is also that the graveyard people were really innovative. Mm-hmm. And as they went to the Gemba and started investigating some of the problems, how can we increase productivity, solve some of the problems, they found some of their most innovative solutions came from the graveyard people, because they were already used to having to solve problems, because they were always left in the lurch when they had problems at night, because there was no support during the day.
Yeah.
Or there's no support at night that you might normally get during the day.
Get during the day.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a broader thing, because it goes to the whole idea of Gemba, of what the Gemba is. The Gemba is a real-time situation where the work is happening.
Right.
You may say, I'm going to the Gemba, where you're going at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to where the work is being done, but that's not the Gemba at all times.
It's 3 in the morning.
At 3 in the morning, the
Yeah,
Gemba might
yeah.
be very different. In this case, it was very, very different. And it wasn't until you actually take that action to find out, go and see, that you
Right.
really know what's happening. And it was really very interesting for them, and they learned a lot from that process.
And I would say that this kind of in general, this got me thinking is, what are, now in this case the difference in Gembas was due to shifts. But there may be other ways where maybe the Gemba varies from time to time or shift to shift, or who knows. I mean, so you got to be thinking, what is the workplace, and does the workplace vary for some reason?
Yeah.
And I need to understand where that Gemba is changing each time, and be sure that I visit the workplace at those times where it might be different from other times. Now, obviously, the shift difference makes a lot of sense. Off the top of my head, I can't think of what other differences might be, but I'm
just
sure there are.
within workers on the Gemba, I mean, there may be different processes. You try to eliminate this. There might be
Right.
slightly different processes that people do when they're at their work.
Or even just different plants. You may think that
Different
if
plants, too.
plant A has exactly the same process as plant B, it's set up
Probably
exactly the
doesn't.
same, has
Yeah.
the same assembly lines.
Yeah.
But there may be a difference, and you can't assume that it's the same at plant A as it is at plant
There
B.
may be differences in work instructions based on language. Like, for instance, a Brazil plant may have different nuance in the language from one in England or
Right.
one in China, where the language it's the same words theoretically, but the nuances of the language may lead to differences in the
Right.
way that stuff is done. So being there, having eyes on the process physically is really, really important for these managers. Really
So
good
good
lesson
stuff
there.
from Kevin.
Yeah, good lesson there.
Okay.
Okay, well now, for those of you who work within metrology, we know that you're among our industry's most skilled quality professionals. You all provide a serious and superior level of accuracy and reliability to projects in manufacturing. You can be building and archaeological sites, infrastructure, energy, a lot more. Now, our close partners at the Coordinate Metrology Society, they're really the go-to place for hardware, software, and services within large volume, close tolerance, portable, three-dimensional test, measurement, and alignment. And each month we bring you the special CMS Corner segment of our show, in which we chat with practitioners of the metrology arts. And today we're going to be joined by an emerging leader in the field, Alfredo Grandara of ATT Metrology. Alfredo, thanks for joining us here on CMS
How's it
Corner.
going?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good.
How are you?
Pretty good. Just doing some training here at the Hexagon facility in Kent, Washington. Getting trained up with some CMM experience, and kind of just moving forward with my experience in the metrology industry.
That's great.
Well, actually, since you brought up, what do you guys up there in Kent? What do you guys do within the test and measurement field?
So ATT, they're a provider of large volume dimensional metrology that include laser trackers, scanners, total stations, portable CMMs, stationary CMMs, and photogrammetry services. So in that grasp of technology that we use, we provide measurement services, equipment rentals, as well as target accessories for any inspection that you have to complete.
And let me dive into this, the service piece of this a little bit, because a lot of times people kind of are a little confused about what a service metrology company really does. So what are the typical maybe challenges and opportunities that a service provider like ATT Metrology will offer to its customers?
Well, I think the biggest advantage that we offer is that you don't have to maintain a metrology department inside your company. A lot of the companies that we service they go from big companies to really small companies, and I think that's where we take the advantage, that they don't have to upfront the cost of the equipment that we're using, as well as we do all the planning, the templating of, say, a first article inspection on a part, or a generic inspection of a tool. We plan all those out in our metrology softwares and implement them. So it takes away that need for internal metrology resources in big to small companies.
And what was your journey like to this field? I mean, how did you get involved in metrology? How did you find your way to ATT Metrology?
Yeah, so originally I'm from San Diego. I went to school in San Francisco, the University of San Francisco, where I studied entrepreneurship and innovation. And in that major, we had a very impactful kind of training mentally, where we look for opportunities where a lot of people aren't in. I actually met the daughter of the CEO and founder of ATT Metrology at my university, where we kind of connected. I came up for a vacation on the 4th of July, started talking to Steve, he's our CEO, and from there I just got super interested in the idea. Before that, I had no idea that metrology was even a thing. Inspections were even a thing. I just thought, this is my iPhone. It just gets made from a machine that pops them out correctly every time, right? But came to find that that's definitely not it.
And what was your major?
Entrepreneurship and innovation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That's great.
Okay.
Well, and that's a really good question, because we talk about this a lot. I know the CMS is really interested in this, as all of us in industry are. I mean, you have a unique background. This is not a background that you hear a lot of people that are in the metrology space that came into it in that way.
Yeah, so typically technical.
Technical.
Yeah.
Typically. So the question really for you, as a young guy who is relatively newly in the field, what do you think we can do to help encourage more young people to pursue STEM careers, to pursue STEM education, and then pursue careers in STEM fields?
I think that's an intriguing question. I mean, I see from going to the CMSC this year, I really didn't see many young individuals around my age, So I think the most important is exposure. I think the understanding, and like I said, before even talking to Steve, I had no idea that metrology was even a field that you could go into. You would expect it just to fall under engineering schooling, which, from a lot of the people that I've talked to that have an engineering background, it's not something that's highlighted. So I think making it more available to the youth, and that comes with software keys that are for schools to use. Right now, you take a spatial analyzer key that's ranging from 20 to 25,000. For an individual, especially a young individual, to get into it and get some exposure and training, you usually have to fall into a position sort of like I did, where I fell into a very established company that was able to offer me all these trainings, and willing to invest in my education in the industry. So I think primarily it's the exposure and the willingness for the software or the main players in the industry to really start pushing this information in this software and direct it to the youth. And I think that's going to come along very parallel with the transfer from a manual inspection to these more automated processes that are coming around. Using the CMM, training the CMM, programming the CMM. I think those are a lot more. Those are fields that a lot more of the youth would be interested in, rather than the normal, like you said, the normal way of going into it, where it would be a more mechanical, more tooling experience background. So I think that definitely needs to be a shift in the industry.
You also mentioned just a second ago that you attended the Coordinate Metrology Systems Conference. How would you say that the Coordinate Metrology Society, who sponsors that event, who puts on that event. How has this CMS helped you learn and advance your career? I mean, is there an advantage to being part of an organization like that?
Oh, I think it's advanced me greatly. I made connections at the CMSC that I probably would have never made with service providers, with software individuals that, because I think in general the industry is seeing that there is not a lot of youth in the industry. So when I start talking to them about my experience, a lot of the people that I talk to, they actually offer training off the books, kind of just like, hey, reach out to me if you ever want to learn this particular software or this particular instrument, and I'll go with you. I'll come down to your office, show you how to use it. So I think those were the key items that I took away from the CMSC, and I think it's important if you're just starting to get into the industry to be involved in something like that, where you're able to be exposed to the main players of the industry all in one place, rather than slowly coming across them as you move through your career.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that. Obviously, we're very familiar with the CMSC and that conference because it is a small conference. You are able, like you said, to be able to have kind of one-on-one discussions with vendors and users and that sort of thing, more so than you would at a really big, event or something. Because
Right.
This is a small event. It does give you a lot more networking capabilities, I would think.
Oh yeah, for sure. I gained a lot of people very high up in the industry that now I'm connected with them on LinkedIn or on an email basis where we shared our contact information. Even from this corner, I've already received a few messages on LinkedIn reaching out and interested in maybe partnering through ATT
Very cool.
metrology. So it's already working, as you can tell. This is a great way of networking, and that includes the CMSC and the conferences that they put up.
Oh, awesome.
That's great. Well, Alfredo Grandara of ATT Metrology, we'll let you get back to your training. Thank you for joining us today and taking a little time out of your day here on CMS Corner on Quality Digest Live.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alfredo.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Alfredo. All right, well, that's going to do it for our show this week. But before we go, of course, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Olympus. Olympus's Vanta XRF analyzers provide fast, accurate elemental analysis when screening for lead, arsenic, mercury, and other toxic metals in consumer products like toys, apparel, and electronics, all to help support compliance with RoHS requirements. Other Olympus technologies include ultrasonic flaw detectors and thickness gauges, videoscopes, borescopes, industrial microscopes, advanced non-destructive testing systems, and a large selection of industrial scanners, probes, software, programs, and instrument accessories. So, for more information, visit online at olympus-ims.com or click on the banner just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
There you go. And thanks again to Alfredo Gandara of ATT Metrology for joining us on the show. And it was also great to chat with Eric Gasper,
That's right.
PQ Systems, with whom we're teaming up next week to offer the webinar, The Importance of R&R Studies. Eric Gasper is the presenter and I'll be hosting, so check it out. The event is this coming Tuesday, November 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Keep your eyes open for your email inbox for instructions about how to register, or simply click on the link right down there.
That's right.
And that'll take you out there to the registration page. So thanks once again for joining us for another fantastic week of Quality Digest Live, and we will see you next week.
Have a good weekend.
So long.
Bye.